I love all my smart friends. I love it when they come together. All right, it is right at the top of the hour. So in the interest of respecting everybody's time, I am going to introduce Firecat's First Fridays, which is our series of events that just keep us all sharp, keep us inspired and up to date. Firecat Studio is a user experience consultancy. We help organizations make excellent experiences. And there's a big tool set with that, and it's hard to keep up with because it's very important. Everybody's sort of newly aware of how important digital life is and ease of experience can be. So we're busy and happy, but we can always learn how to do things better. Today, I have invited one of my smart friends that I met when we were both working at Travelocity, the travel company with the little gnome, if you remember that. They're still around, but Marty and I have both moved on from there. And I am going to invite Marty to introduce herself. We will take up the whole hour, but toward the end, we're going to open it up for Q&A. And at a few times, I'm going to ask you to participate by typing in the chat. Marty, you ready?
Sure. Hi. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. This will be fun. I always like these events, especially when you get a bunch of people who will participate. Everybody participates. We're all trying to learn something. And always the first couple of slides, I'm always a little nervous the first couple of slides, but after we get going, I promise to make you laugh. So I'm going to go to my screen and go to screen share so you guys can see the deck as I go through. And let me go to screen share and go to screen share, and then I'll go into presentation mode, which will also help. We'll try this. So hopefully this will work, and you're probably gonna have to feed me the questions, Susan, because I can't, once I'm in presentation mode like this, I can no longer see the comments. So
I will do that. I'm on that.
So this presentation, basically, we're going to talk about creating and implementing a usable design system. First thing I want to do is give you a little bit of information about me. My name is Marti Gold. I'm the Director of Strategic Experience Design for SiriusXM and Pandora. I work in the automotive group, which means every time you get into your car, you push the little button, all the infotainment system on the center console. Somebody in my group was worked on that. Basically, in the strategic group, we're focused on more long-term and future HMI innovations for the in-car experience. And it was particularly interesting about my job is that every single OEM, every single car, every single trim level is completely different. If you get in a car, you could have something from very tall landscape that looked like a portrait to completely wide, new pillar to pillar. If you've seen any of the new concept Cadillacs that are coming out. So there is this, it's not like a tablet or a phone where I know the pixel size or dimensions or even colors or fonts or anything that's going to be used. Because of that, I have to have a design system that gives my team the freedom to iterate and then quickly create designs for every unique requirement or every possible aspect ratio for every car in the world, which sounds a little daunting, but hopefully by the end of this presentation, you'll be able to see how we did that, why it worked, and hopefully trace through and be able to take some of this information back and use it in your own day-to-day lives. The first question is basically, what is a design system and why do I need one? Now, most of you, if you come from the marketing world, whether you're a UX designer, marketing, or whatever, have seen, you've used brand style guides. You may have used pattern libraries. You may have used a lot of different artifacts that will give you some degree of standardization because the organization you're working for needed to maintain consistency as you were building product, because it needs to stay on brand. It's just, you have to have some kind of rails to work within. So the design systems are, it's kind of a buzzword now, I guess is the best description of it. And a lot of things that were style guides and stuff, you'll hear this term a lot, but there's a little question of why is this any different than what I've used previously? So what, why do I need a design system? And basically, if you take a look at designing it, you'll see all these artifacts in here that you already know. There's brand guides, there's templates, you have global CSS style sheets, there's style guides, there's a pattern library, there's a code repository, there's all these things that you're already using. So I was going to ask, I'm sure, how many of you recognize these names, but the real difference between a design system and these is the addition of guidance. What a design system will do is take these information, which is not just a pattern library, it will tell your designers why you're using a particular interaction, why you are using a certain style of button, why these things are there, how they were tested, and give a lot more information and insight into it. The idea then is that lets them make informed decisions on what type of interaction they want to use. We're going to get to more into this later, but the big thing to take away of a design system is truly the addition of that guidance.
So
go ahead.
Do you mind if I ask folks to think about right here, what parts of a system do you already have? Because most of us, even if you don't think, I don't have a design system, you probably have the rudiments of one. Yes. Like you have a logo and you have the way that your stuff is laid out on a business card or on your website, or your website has template pages, that type of stuff. You might have a Word document that's set up to be a proposal, so you might have more of this than you think. Yes. If you want to chime in the chat, I would love to hear what pieces you already have, or if you're one of those people that already is all elbows deep in having a brand system and a design system, I'd love to hear that too. You can keep going. I'll tell you if interesting stuff pops up.
Channel the input as it goes.
I will.
That'll help me too, because then I know kind of how to frame the in-between pieces. So to understand how to make a design system usable, I have to go back in time and sort of tell you a story. So back in the day when I was a creative director at Travelocity, I created our online style guide. Now, I was quite smug about this, just so you'll know. It was genius. It had everything in there that everybody needed. It answered all the questions I thought through all the use cases. Everybody worked months on it, and we were very proud of it. And then I went to a conference and heard UX speaker Jared Spool, and he said the following. In rule-based design, style guides are created so that unintentional designers can accidentally create great designs. The problem is that design style guides never work. People stop using them. Well, meanwhile, I'm sitting here next to my VP who funded my little project, all my design team. We've just spent months doing this, and he says this, and they all kind of gasp. And I thought, oh, clearly he has no idea what he's talking about. Everyone will use my design system. It's genius. And he has just been speaking for so long, he's not in the real world and doesn't understand the importance. So I went on down my way and went back to the office and dismissed the entire thing. The problem was I didn't want to believe it at the time. It turns out he was absolutely right. Rules-based design, which is what he was talking about, means precisely what it says. It's a system based on a series of rules that you have to follow in order to maintain consistency. If you look at this picture, you can see them. You guys recognize these. I'm sure you've seen stuff like this. They're usually far too prescriptive. They're very detailed. They take a long time to create. They're time consuming to maintain because every time there's a change, you have to go back and make changes to them again. You never have time to do that. And worse, designers are then required to create using all these pre-designed templates with these pre-designed elements. And to be blunt, they hate it. They use terms like, all we do is load color in the lines. You'll hear them, because, Lord knows designers never complain. But worse, these kind of systems always lead to this same circular sequence of events. Now, every time I show this next slide, everybody laughs. So, because you think it's unique, but yes, it's happened to all of us. So first of all, the new standards are created and published. Yes, we have new standards. Then the stakeholders come in and now they have a use case that doesn't quite fit and they need an exception. The designers then say, oh no, we're going to take this, it's not really an exception, and they're going to try to enforce their new standards because they worked so hard on them. Well, after they've tried this, after about a month or 6 weeks of this, the stakeholders get smart, and now they bypass design, because design always says no, and they put it, the change request, into Jira as a bug, and they send it straight to dev. Now, the developers who don't know this go code away, and then pretty soon, the first non-compliant pages will start to appear. More and more time goes by, production pages become increasingly inconsistent. Now everybody says, this is ridiculous. We have submit buttons that aren't the same anywhere. The fonts aren't the same. The grids aren't the same. Nothing's the same. And then someone has the genius idea, I know, we need standards. And then you go start this whole process over again, which basically gives your standards document about an 18-month life expectancy before it starts over again, and you end up with this. And there's standards on top of standards, because one of the things people will say is, oh, the reason our standards didn't work wasn't because of the content, it was because of the format. If we had done it online, if we had done it in a collaborative style, if we had done these things, then it would work. No, that's not the reason that it failed. So one of the things we're going to talk about in this section is, why does this happen? Is that I began researching the cyclical nature of these updating, the perpetually updating style guides back in 2013. And I knew that if I was experiencing this, other people had to have been doing it as well. So, and it turns out I wrote a book called UX Style Frameworks. You don't have to buy it. It's old now. You can if you want, but it's 6 years ago. There's not much, things have changed. It was published in 2015, and around that same time, a number of other really highly workable solutions began emerging because we were all experiencing this. Within the next few years, these design systems began evolving very, very quickly. But what we learned was were inherent usability issues that just changing the format or giving it a new name or repackaging it are not going to solve. Just saying, okay, we're now all using reusable components as opposed to prescriptive things is not really the underlying problems. So the good news is your design system can indeed break this cycle. No, this is probably the most important thing that I will say to you this entire element. A design system is just a communication tool. It is not a project. It is a tool that you need to use. Like, for example, you can go to Home Depot and you can buy one of those big tool chests and you can start putting stuff in it, and it's great, but that's not going to fix your house. It's just a tool that you in your arsenal to speed you up and make you more efficient. So on the second half of this deck, we'll start walking through the process of kicking off the creation of a design system. But before you go through all that effort, let me move this screen here. But before you go through all that effort, let's look at some things to make sure you can be confident that once you build it, people will actually use it and you won't get into that cycle again.
Marty, let me tell you a question or an observation that Tori made.
Okay.
She said, I just started doing some work for a company that has a design system, but in actuality, the components in the app aren't consistent. So I'm feeling right now that getting the devs to commit is important. I just wanted you to hear that. I think you're gonna get there with how to get people to adopt.
What's fascinating is that you've already spotted one of the problems. That there's that's hold that. I promise we'll get back to it. Whoops. I don't need the participant. I clicked the wrong button. All right. Ironically, there are 5 rules. Count them, because I sound like such clickbait, don't I? I'm sorry. There are 5 rules that can help you ensure that your design system is not rules-based, and it'll remain usable for your organization. So we're going to start these. You guys will learn as we go through this that I like movies. So first of all, to the Highlander fans out there can be only one. And what this rule means is multiple sources mean conflicting information. So when I started working on the book back in the day, let's say there was a marketing department, a UX department and development team, and they were all using their own standards or guidelines. The marketing had their brand guidelines, UX had a pattern library, and dev had their code repository. So I went through Bootstrap and pulled 124 of the common elements, interact, submit buttons, tabs, tooltips, all that stuff, made a big list of them, and then started comparing across, and I found out that 93% was defined in at least 2 of those places. Most of it in all 3. That's the chart. Anything that's in dark green was in all 3. And if it was a lighter shade of green, it was partially defined. So if you've got elements defined in 3 completely separate documents run by 3 completely separate organizations, what are the chances that all 3 of those sources are going to be in sync? Like zip. It's not, they're just not. There's no way it's going to work. So if you have conflicting information, that means at least one of them, possibly 2, and sometimes all 3 are actually wrong. And as soon as people start using stuff and realize that the information in it is wrong and they lose trust, they'll just stop using it. And at that point, you've done all this work, but they'll just go, no. If the dev thinks that the brand guidelines are wrong for marketing, they won't look at them. If the UX thinks marketing or the code repository is wrong, they won't use it. So you have to have one source that's accessible to everybody. Marketing is going to reference it, UX is going to reference it, product management, developers, and your external vendors, which are optional, ideal. Now, what happens, the reason usually the 3 of them end up separated, is that people are trying to be, I guess, brief on a single page. So let's say, for example, you have a page that's dedicated to buttons. This is how we're going to do submit buttons on our site. You have the colors, the flex, the information, the copy from marketing with voice. You have the patterns, how they're going to expand and collapse, how they're going to behave responsibly from the UX team, and the code repository or links to that the developers need toward the bottom, places where they can download the actual assets. There's no reason you can't put all that on one page. The reason for that is that they'll just skip over the parts they don't need. There's this thing that, okay, well, I don't want to put the code stuff because it'll just confuse the people in marketing. Marketing people are bright. They can understand most of the information I need is only the top section of the page. The idea is to get everything that you need in one place so people can see it, and there's one source of information. Rule number 2 is that you only have 5 minutes. Okay, remember this game, Waldo? You can play Waldo and find and it's a good look at thing. Well, this is kind of what happens to people if you have really complicated standards across 3 systems. So let's look at how standards die. Standards die by, there's a designer and they have a deadline. And they need to know what shade of blue to make your submit button. So the designer checks the standards documentation, and in that they find 8 different shades of blue across 3 different documents. So now they don't know what shade of blue it's supposed to be. However, states are different, whatever it is, there's definite problems there. So because they've got a deadline and they have to make a decision, they give up and they go to the website in production. They dig around until they find a submit button. Then they'll either do a screenshot and use the eyedropper to pull the hex color, or they'll use, Chrome tools, something, but that's how they're going to get that hex code. Okay, works great. This works particularly well if your buttons are gradient, by the way. The developer is then going to code the button to match the color specified by the designer, because all developers know, how designers are. If you don't follow their specs, they get in trouble. So they're not even going to look to see. They're just going to code it the color the designer said in their envision specs or whatever they said to make it. And that is how you end up with 37 shades of blue on a single submit button. Now, at that point, the efficiency of the whole process starts to fall apart, because you might as well be designing with inline styles at this point. Make sense? Is everybody still with me? I start to stop it.
I'm muted, but yes, yes,
We're
yes,
good?
yes.
Okay, we're still good. So when you start getting to this, you only have 5 minutes section, ask yourself these questions. One, how many people have actually read your standards? And have you? Hands up, okay? I saw a bank that shall remain nameless. Their standards documentation was in a binder. It was about 2 inches thick. Printed binder PDF that they distributed. There was no way to search it. There was no way to find anything. They had multiple, there was a credit card division that had one set of standards. There was a home loan information that had another one. It was amazing. There was conflicting information everywhere and no one knew what to do. So again, whatever you're going to do, make sure they can find it within 5 minutes. If, and we'll get to this in a minute, if you've actually defined a standard for it, because you're going to find out that you're often defining standards for things you really don't need to be defining standards for. So it should be brief and they can find it in 5 minutes. Rule number 3. Okay, for the 80s children back there, hold on loosely. With the 38 Special song, yes, sing this in your head over and over and over again. For those of you who don't know it and are too young, then go to Sirius XM and go to Classic Rewind and you can hear it. Perfection is unattainable. Oh, if I could dwell into any designer, no matter what you do, it's going to change. It's going to change all the time. So when you're creating or revamping your standards, beware the dangers of defining too many things, over engineering, over specifying. Because if you do these things, the first business case that comes along is going to need an exception, in quotes, and you're going to be back in that cycle that you saw earlier. Your designers just need the Lego blocks. Go over, give them that nice little pile. Here's your blue block, here's red, here's yellow, here's different sizes, here's all the stuff that you need. Just drop them down. Don't design the house for them, because the first stakeholder is going to come along and they're going to say, the chimney has to be blue. The designers are going to go, no, the chimneys have to be black. All chimneys have to be black. It says right here, they have to be. And they're going to go back and change, and you're going to get back into that cycle again. The designers that work for you have trained and studied. They know how to design. They know how to work. They need to work with the product managers because every use case is different and your customers change all the time. Give them the blocks, then let them actually design. They'll be much happier. You'll have very consistent pages and everything, and you'll be able to evolve and move fast, move much, much, much faster.
You are getting some shout outs here in the chat.
Pardon me?
You're getting some shout outs. Santosh says, excellent POV. Tori said, she's speaking truth.
I said, give them a perfect example. If you just take a look at, think about Target's brand and all that, because this isn't a website, but just from a print standpoint. This is a company that has, all they have is red, a circle, and Helvetica. Now, if you managed to turn a brand out of red, a circle, and Helvetica, well done you. But they got a very clear, flexible system that if you see red, a circle, and Helvetica, you know it's a Target ad before the logo even comes up. You know, you recognize it immediately. And that's the positive of a simple block-driven, define your brand and your standards and build what you need for the individual pages. And if you can do that, the blocks will take care of themselves, or the houses will take care of themselves. You need to worry about the blocks. Rule number 4, say what you mean. Oh, this is another one you guys are going to love. Okay, see the picture on the side? What is that? There, so it's got a box on top that you have to interact with. The background is grayed back. Is it a modal? Is it a light box? Is it an overlay? Is it a popover? What do you call that? One of the things you will have to do with, and this document will help you define that, is you have to adopt a consistent vocabulary. There are a lot of things in the digital world that use the same word to describe two completely different things. My husband is a developer at Google. I can assure you design pattern to him does not mean the same thing as a design pattern to me. If we use it in a sentence at the dinner table, there's going to be confusion. So companies develop their own internal understanding, but problems then emerge because people change jobs. So you take what you called it here, and now you move it over here. So there was a great instance that came up, and they said there was a business owner who insisted on having an overlay. And there was a front page that said, no, it has to have an overlay. It has to have an overlay. People won't understand what it is. It's got to have an overlay. It's got to have an overlay. They were running out of time. The designers and developers kept saying, that's ridiculous. You're killing an ant with a hydrogen bomb. Don't do this. And finally, they were running out of time, and they were like, fine, just here's your overlay. So the business owner saw it. And she said, what is that? And they said, that's your overlay that you said you wanted over and over again. And she said, oh no, I wanted that. You just roll over and the overlay pops up and you see the message on it. And they said, that's not an overlay, that's a tooltip. To which she replied, what on God's earth is a tooltip? And they said, and so they ended up wasting an entire sprint. I don't care how, God knows how many emails and JIRA comments because of a vocabulary issue. So get on the path. One of the things your design standards is going to do is to define a consistent vocabulary across all the pieces. And rule number 5, this is the last one of the rules, and is think republic and not dictatorship. And this is because standards controlled by a single department will almost always fail. Okay, it just will. Like this poor man who's sitting here trying to work with all these people around him, giving him conflicting information. They'll usually fail for one of 3 reasons. First of all, it's absolutely impossible for one department to keep all this documentation up to date. A design standards need to be a collaborative document that everyone can participate in. That obviously there's some governance on stuff, but there needs to be comments. People should be able to edit it, change it, and update it, and notify the others when there's a change. One department cannot take responsibility for this. The other problem is it's almost impossible for one department to fully understand the needs and requirements of the others. I don't know how many of you are in the UX department. I'm quite sure that you know that the developers could care less about some of the things that you stay awake night worrying about. So what's going to happen is if you do the standards, you're going to put the important stuff in for you in there, but you're not going to put the important stuff for them in there. This is why all three of these groups particularly need to work on a single document altogether. And the other thing is that the authors aren't always right. I know I personally have never made a mistake, but I'm quite sure. No, no, surely not. No. If you have stuff in other departments or other people, they're going to check this work, and it keeps things from being inaccurate. And that's how you build trust in the system. And so for your design system to survive, it needs to be collaborative. And everyone, it's not marketing style guide. It's not UX's pattern library. It's not dev's code repository. It is your company's design standards, your company's design system, and everybody uses it with the same amount of flexibility. And more importantly, they're all proud of it. And they all feel a sense of ownership when they take care of it. And 5A, this is the variation. This is a new one. There's the term called bike shedding. This is for every design manager in the room that manages designers is going to laugh when they hear about this one. So at Berkeley, there was a group of engineers who was in charge of making the plans for this gigantic nuclear power plant thing. It was one of the most complex projects you could ever think of. What they found was that it was so big and so overwhelming that the groups, when they would meet, would start to try to break it down. And they ended up spending like an inordinate amount of time discussing the design of the bike shed for where the people who worked there were going to store their bikes while they were working. Because it was a little problem that they can get their brains around, as opposed to this gigantic thing that will go on. So it is easy for teams who are working on design systems to get so focused on building this design system that they will put off real work. So you can see this happen because designers love a sense of control. If you come in and say, okay, we're going to do a new style guide, they'll all jump up and go, me, because they think that if they do the style guide or the design standard, people are going to follow their rules, and they consider it, there's, like I say, there's a control issue. You have to remember the design system is a tool. It only exists to speed up real work. It is not the work. It's just the tool. But because these systems give them that sense of control, they can real quickly lose track of the priorities. So when you start to do this, the sharing ownership among the teams helps, but put design system stories into your sprint planning. Don't make them more than 2 points as you're building these things. It can't take over real work. Set a max number of hours per week. Rotate the tasks between the designers. Don't give one designer say, you're in charge of the design system, because you'll never see them again. They'll off, and they'll do it, and they'll do every one of the rules that I just told you not to do. They won't know everything. They'll make mistakes. They won't collaborate. They'll spend too much time, the whole 9 yards. So try to avoid the bike shedding if you can. Just remember, you're building a tool. This is just a tool to build the house. It's not the house. The house is what your company builds, or what your company produces and sells. So the 5 rules, there can be only one. You only have 5 minutes. Hold on loosely, say what you mean, and think Republican, not dictatorship. And that 5A one, to beware of the bike shedding issue. But those 5. Now, armed with that, so here we'll stop for a second. How am I doing on time, Susan? My Apple Watch. Oh, good.
You are doing great on time.
Yay!
And that's good, because we've got some folks who are wrestling with design systems right now, and we'll have very specific questions.
Okay. Should we stop here and do some of those, or are we going to keep going? I can keep going.
I think keep going, and then, yeah, five fingers to remember. They're liking that.
Okay. Well, I may answer some of them, so hopefully we'll get back into it. So, okay, with the 5 rules in mind, where do you start? All right. These are very basic. Well, not basic. They're actually very specific, but they're also, they have to take into account your individual company. So if you're really going to do this, I would recommend you call Susan. She can set up get a plan, help mediate, do these kind of things to help you really get started and make the most efficient use of your time to get one of these systems, going. So I can show you how I did it, and then as they say, your mileage may vary. So first of all, just keep repeating this. When starting this process, remember that building a design system is not your goal. Your goal is to create real deliverables quickly and efficiently with as little rework as possible. That's your goal, not the design system. The design system is a tool that supports that goal. But so if you get, when you start doing this, I put that up in a sign on my wall. It said, your goal is to make the thing we paid you to make, not focus on the tool. So the step 1 was basically, you've got to conduct some just basic user research. Because you're building a tool, your employees are now your customers. It's shocking how many people I've learned that are in UX firms, when they start to do their own internal tools, skip this whole step, and you can't. So go do some basic research and find out the following. 1, how many departments in your company already have some kind of guides or standards or libraries or depositories or whatever they call it to help speed up their work and again, maintain consistency? How are they using them? Is this something that everybody uses every single day, that it's just ingrained, or is it something they reference every now and then? What do their assets and what do these documents include? Best, can you get a copy of it? And if you do have multiple standards, ask them, why is your version, or what you better than this? Like, why aren't you using marketings? Why didn't you just expand on marketings and you made your own? It's almost always, well, it didn't include this and it didn't include that. And you'll often hear what I said earlier about how, well, they don't need to know this. Those are horrifying words, by the way. They don't need to know this. But you have to figure out, clearly identify what is it in that standard that they're using that's so important to them that they won't hang on to, because then you're prioritizing, you're going to be able to start learning what to put into yours. And then what does each department want to keep? More importantly, what has to be tossed out? What worked and what didn't? Just do straight up user interviews for the people who use these systems every day, not the executives. Go talk to the people who use them. The executives, because usually a lot of times the executives help define it and they decide what they're going to use, and that's not always useful either. Then, once you do this, hold a cross-departmental work to have a kickoff workshop. A kickoff workshop will get everybody who's going to do this, all the people that you interviewed, in one place at one time, and basically this is just to level set the expectations and goals. You'll know more about this as we get through these last few slides. Talk openly, and you need to get a commitment to share and use the system because of rule number 1. That there can be only one. You need to say, okay, we're going to make a design system. We're all going to use it. You're all going to participate. Nobody's getting left out. Nobody's going off in a silo and designing something you're going to have to use that you didn't have any input with. And you'll be surprised how easy this is to get people, because they don't really want to maintain this on their own anyway. The fact that it's going to be shared and more useful for everybody, a lot of people think this is going to be a tough sell. It's actually not as hard as I thought it was going to be tough, but it actually wasn't as hard as I thought it ended up being. During this meeting, present and review the research found in step 1 and ask for the clarifications. Once they see that you're actually including them, okay, we went to development, they said they needed this. We went to marketing, they said they needed this, and that they actually had a voice, you're going to get even more buy-in on that first bullet. And then get each department to give you a representative from that department to be part of a working group. That person, you hopefully is maybe a manager or lead level, not an executive, because they're not doing it every day, but not so junior they can't participate and they won't be able to debate within the room with someone else, that they're going to have to represent their org and communicate back as things move forward, because we want this working group to actually start building out the structure of this system. Step 2, which is a continued, is a DACI chart. It's similar to a RACI in the sense that this is going to be making sure you have everybody that you need to know about. The worst thing is you get one of these systems and then you find out there was somebody that had to be there that wasn't there, and then they throw a hand grenade into the whole thing and you start over again. So first, the DACI stands for one, there's a driver. This is a person who's coordinating the effort. Meetings, where your deliverables, you're supposed to have feedback back from your group XYZ. This is usually a program manager. Can be somebody on the group, but the PMs have a tendency to be a little more objective about it than everybody else. The approvers, these are the stakeholders who are ultimately going to need to approve. These are usually your executive sponsors who are letting you do this and spend resources to do it. There's probably only 2 or 3 of those max. If you get into approver that there's 15 approvers, then we got to do some more negotiations back in that first room that try to get this to 2 or 3. The contributors are the working group. This is that group of people that are actually going to construct the initial system. They represent each of the individual key compartments. They're responsible for having meetings within their own department, gathering their requirements, letting that department agree on what was a priority and what wasn't, what's in, what's out. And they're going to represent the department in collaborative efforts and negotiations with the other teams, and they're going to send information back out. So they're like the point person in this group. So you've now got a working group or tiger team, depending on what you want to call it, and then they're going to feed out information accordingly. The informed is the list. It basically is the section of the DACI chart that makes everybody feel warm and fuzzy because their name is on it. And this are people going to be informed. You're going to be informed about the progress but you're not going to be engaged. They're not going to be engaged on a day-to-day basis, which is they're fine, just so they know what's going on. And you'll be fine. You'll start sending out when they start seeing the progress and the things they're making. You'll find out that they get less and less antsy. But putting them on that list at the beginning, I found makes everybody feel just slightly more warm and fuzzy. Oops. And so step 3, the contributors then gather the requirements. And now you have to figure out, how are you going to publish this thing? Because you got to do it somewhere. So one of the things that will determine that is what platforms you're going to have to support. Because I have a very different needs in my company because I just do automotive. So, you know, some will have just web, mobile. Some places don't do smart speakers, so they're not going to have real heavy voice. Sometimes I've got, you know, I have all these, you know, you're not going to do automotive head units, so that's probably not a platform for you. But if you look at this, what systems you're going to have to support, and which will also tell you what kind of asset types are you going to have to, are you going to have a lot of videos? Are you going to have music? Are you going to have voice? Are you going to have voice input? What kind of assets do you have to support? And those two will often determine which publishing platform you can evaluate. It'll get you a short list. You can start with, the most important thing is that you have to be able to get it into other people's workflow. So don't get something weird that they have to learn that nobody's ever seen or heard from before, you know, because that'll just disrupt everything. It needs to permit collaborative feedback and editing. They've got to be able to leave you comments. They've got to be able to do, which almost all the tools have now. And you need to be able to present all the necessary asset types so they can be documented or located and or sent to a link and downloaded. This means basically you could do it everything. I use Adobe XD. You could do it in Figma. You could do it in WordPress. You can do it in Google Docs. You can do it in whatever it is that is in your organization that will let you start putting these things together. People can add to it, and it can link off to get to the assets that they need, because as we all repeat after me, there can be only one. So when you're looking at these, it truly depends on how sophisticated you're going to eventually need to be. A word of caution here, not caution. The mental effort that goes into a design system is the mental effort to figure out how to break it up and how it's going to be there, not the publishing platform itself. It is, once the decisions have been made, it is easy to move it from Google Docs to Figma, or from WordPress, if you know that, to Adobe XD, because the content's there. It's copying and pasting. You can literally, I mean, how many times you guys have looked at something and said, oh, I've got to copy this, or I'm going to convert it, and you think, oh, I can rebuild it faster than I can try to convert it or go through all these things. The effort is in the mental effort to organize and do the data, not the platform itself. So don't get completely carried away on this and put off doing it for fear that you're going to make a mistake on the platform. Because trust me, I've moved so many of these. It's not difficult. It's not even, I mean, it's like one sprint maybe for one person, because all the how it's set up is already there. The information's already there. It's not that difficult to do. And you're saying, yes, but there's all this stuff. And this is where we're going to get to a sidebar. If you are studying design systems or talking about these, you are going to hear about atomic design. It's just like you just will. So atomic design was a methodology created by Brad Frost, and it basically takes chemistry and talks about how things are put together in the real world, and it uses that same methodology to how you will build the Lego blocks that I had shown you previously. In atomic design, it's called that because the terms he uses. The first level is an atom, and an atom are just the basic UI elements that you can't break down any further. There's an icon, there's a button, there's an input field, there's just all little discrete toggle, yes, no, radio buttons, check boxes, all those little tiny atomic elements. Molecules are created they're a more complex reusable component that combines atoms together. A perfect example is a search bar. In a little search bar, you have an input field, there's the search submit button, and usually a little icon, and that's your company's search input field all the time. Organisms are then you take atoms and molecules and you put them together and you make an organism. And that's even more complex things. That's where stuff like your header, your footer, a navigation bar. A navigation bar will have a search bar. It'll have a drop down for settings. It'll have 2 or 3 links for going off to different pages. It may have your logo, whatever it is across your top nav. So that would qualify as an organism. A template is then basically a blank wireframe. It's a page structure, and it's where you plug in the organisms into these empty blocks for use across multiple pages. A perfect example would be a search results page. A search results page, when we were at Travelocity, we had a search results page for airlines and a search results page for hotels, a search results page for car rentals. Well, those were basically the same template, but the individual elements in them were slightly different because you have different criteria for planes than you do for cars or for hotels. So a template would be this structure with no data in it. And then the last page are the actual individual specific pages that the templates then create. That's your individual profile page, your airline search results page, landing pages, whatever the specific ones. The nice thing about the pages and templates, the way it works, is that as you have to make changes to your pages, as new business rules come in and you make changes, the pages then inform and allow the rest of it, especially the templates, to be updated. So if you suddenly came on and said, we've done research, we really need the nav or the filters on this to be, we used to have them down the left side, but we found out people aren't really using them that much. We want to have them in a hamburger menu on the right. The template can change because you've made that adjustment, something that you've learned from production in the real world. So that's the way atomic design works. I didn't go backwards. Oh, it's not going to let me go back. Oh, I'm sorry. And nothing like crashing into anything. Now you guys get to see the whole deck again down to here. Where was I? This is why you do. All right, I can go back to present again. Look at that. I meant to do that. That was like Pee Wee Herman. The less important sidebar is my team's variation of this to show you can still take atomic design. And again, these are guidelines. You know your company, what you need. I used a somewhat similar construct, but I got rid of all the templates and pages because I had this huge range of every color, every size, shape that there could possibly be. I invented a thing called scaffolding that put at the base level. The scaffolding was my underlying structure on which everything else was built. I had a flexible 12-column grid that I could adjust the margins and the spacing between the columns depending on the OEM, how it happened. Then my atoms and molecules were then built on 2-column, 3-column, 4-column spans to be able to, that way I could fit it into whatever the grid was that I needed it to work on. I also included the colors and the typography. So with the scaffolding, I have a flexible grid. I know what colors I'm going to use for the brand. I know the typography. By using, those of you who have used symbols know that I basically have a white label. I can call it up. I can change the grid. I can swap out the type. I can swap out the colors, and all my components know, blah, 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 and they automatically change from Toyota to General Motors. So that scaffolding became a very big issue for mine as opposed to the traditional atomic design templates and pages. Again, the same thing. The atoms came in, the molecules came in, and the organisms came in. So that's just my variation. So if you see atomic design and you're not in a page world, you can still follow this Lego block, building block structure. Take with something little and go to there. Now, here's the last piece that you're going to 4 and 5 that's going to be important for you. Then you take the working group, then takes all the assets that you got from the marketing team and the UX pattern library and stuff, and you're going to start getting them and figuring out where they are in their proper level. Is this an atom? Is this a molecule? Is this an organism? Is this a page? Is this whatever it is? And depending on the structure you select, you start assigning them. And this is where you're going to be shocked, because most managers, you'll realize that your teams have been designing and developing at the organism and page level, not with templates. That's why you have 37 different submit buttons. That's why sometimes you have if you have a perfect example is a show hide collapse, when you click something and then it expands down. Sometimes if you click the next one, this closes back up, and the other one, sometimes they all stay open until you manually close them. That's why those inconsistencies exist, because what happened is people started designing at organism and page level and not at this incremental pulling the individual Lego blocks. As a result, you're going to have virtually infinite variety of atoms and molecules. So when you take these components that you built and say, okay, break them apart, go to your sketch file, start pulling them apart and put all the submit buttons together, you're going to go, and that will, I promise you, that is a shocking and interesting and funny experience if you go at it with the right attitude. If you tell people to expect this, then when they find it, they go, mind blown. So now you've got all this stuff separated, you're starting to get things to the proper level, and this is where the culling process begins. Everything has to earn its place. Now this is where you start throwing stuff out. Is this too prescriptive? 95% of the time, absolutely. It's going to be way too prescriptive, because that's why you're going to have 15 versions of your search box. Sometimes the icon will be on this side. Sometimes there'll be a link that says show password. Sometimes it won't be. It'll be all over the place. And that's when you have to start culling stuff out. And this is where the debate then begins on what the one is going to look like. Now, once you do the scaffolding and the atoms, just the scaffolding and the atoms, forget about molecules, forget about everything else, then stop and publish what you've done for feedback. Great design systems are never presented to the organization as a grand reveal. If you do this, you're back to the same problem, that you're not going to get feedback early and often enough. It's not going to be iterative. You're not going to have that sense of ownership that you need. Just do scaffolding and atoms, then go back to that initial group. Go to your DACI chart, show this to everybody, explain the publishing tool you've selected and why. Because if it's the wrong publishing tool, you need to know this now too, right up front. Present the scaffolding and atoms as examples of the proposed granularity. This is what a page on button is going to look like. Here's an example of it. Here's the rules on why we use it. Here's the link to any test results that showed how this button was effective. Here's the link to the sketch file where you can get it. Here's a link to the code repository that you know where to pull it. Pull all these things together. So anybody who wants to be, what is a button? Because you only got 5 minutes. They go to button, they know they can go to your design system, they can type in button, and that page will show up, and everything they need is in one place. Once they see that, and that their information was included, and that the page is actually useful to them, then you can start iterating and building, make the changes, iterating and build, and getting the rest of the stuff in. So gather the feedback, iterate at this level. If there's a bunch of changes, do them again before you start moving to the molecules and organisms. But once you get at this point, you can relax, because you now have a design system. If all you've got are the individual Lego blocks and no instructions on how to put them together, that doesn't mean your Lego blocks aren't valid. Doesn't mean they're not going to work. They're great. People can start using this system right away. They can go and start pulling things out of it, because everything from this point in is just the way the structure works, is still just iterating. You're still going to take the pieces. Now, in the process, you're going to find a bunch of atoms that you didn't define. You're going to find containers that maybe weren't defined. How you're going to do horizontal rules that weren't defined. Really basic things to keep your site consistent as you go through that are going to end up being atoms. You're going to find missing icons. You're going to find icon inconsistency. There's a lot of stuff. But again, just do the first two, because after that, you're just iterating and adding to it and letting it grow. And also, because of that group, constantly weeding because everything has to earn its place.
Awesome.
So the takeaway at the end of all this was, if you just remember, your design system is just a tool. It's to provide your designers with information, tools, and materials to improve their efficiency. That's it. That's all it does. It's not supposed to prescribe design solutions for them.
You've got smart people who design for you. You should let them do their thing.
Absolutely.